Okay, well, I think we are ready to get started now. It is 6:02. There are 32 participants joining us, and hopefully more come as we move on. So, hi, everybody. My name is Sierra Ryan. I am a water resources planner with the County of Santa Cruz, and I also am staff to the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency. So welcome to our private well owner stakeholder meeting. I'm going to turn it over to our private well owner representatives, Angela, Jeff, and Eden, to kick us off.
Hey, Sierra. So I think we can just start off by kind of, welcome everybody. We're glad that you joined us. We know it's late and it's, I think we have a 2-hour meeting, so we'll try to get through it pretty quickly, but hopefully you'll find some really interesting information. And, hopefully at the end, this will give you guys an opportunity to also ask questions and, share your concerns and, voice that to all of us so we can take that back with us. So my name is Angela Franklin. I've lived in Scotts Valley for about 20 years. I am a private well owner. I have been on the Santa Margarita, I think now a little over 3.5 years, maybe close to 4 years. So I'm kind of entrenched now, but happy to be here and represent the private well owners.
Okay, does everybody feel ready to get started? So I am going to give the first presentation of the night, I should say. It's a little background for those of you who are new to the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency and to groundwater management in general. It's just a little background information about exactly why we asked you to come join us today. So let's begin with this picture of lots of boring-looking people standing over a desk. So, unmitigated groundwater pumping statewide has led to numerous economic and environmental problems. In 2014, in an attempt to start to remedy this situation, Governor Jerry Brown signed into effect the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And this law is meant to facilitate local management of groundwater in a coordinated way and to prevent further damage that is caused by overpumping. So what do we mean when we say sustainable groundwater management? Sustainable groundwater management is basically managing groundwater without causing any of the negative indicators that the state has laid out. And those are the chronic lowering of groundwater levels, reduction in groundwater storage, seawater intrusion, which thankfully we don't have in this basin, degraded water quality, land subsidence, again, we don't have in this basin, and surface water depletions, especially those that could cause negative impacts to groundwater dependent ecosystems and species that frequent them. It is up to us locally to decide what is considered significant and reasonable for all of these. How do we know if all of the indicators identified locally are sustainable or not? That's something that we get to decide. The state doesn't tell us. So let's talk about how we reach sustainability. So every high and medium priority basin, as designated by the state in California, is required to write a groundwater sustainability plan. And lucky us, we are a medium priority basin, and so we ourselves have to write a groundwater sustainability plan that will outline our approach for how we will reach sustainability. This is a little timeline of the plan. You'll hear a little bit more about what's in the plan as the presentations go on. But this is the phases of development. So phase 1 was forming an agency. We formed the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency, and I'll talk about that a little in a couple minutes. Phase 2 is preparing this plan. As you see, this plan is due in 2022. It's actually due in January of 2022. We have been working away at it now for several years, and this next year coming up is critically important for a lot of decisions that are going to be made at the local level about what we mean by sustainability and how we plan to reach it. And that is why we wanted everybody to get engaged now, because this is really, we're really ramping up these efforts, and it's a good time to familiarize yourself with the effort and to find ways that you can participate. The GSP will be reviewed by the Department of Water Resources at the state level, and they will tell us whether we have achieved what we were set out to achieve in terms of our plan. And then if all goes well, we will start the implementation of the plan. And 20 years after implementation starts, we are expected to have achieved sustainability as we have defined it. And then we must maintain that sustainability for the next 30 years after that. Every 5 years, we evaluate our plan. So this is a graphic that I pulled from the state. What it's meant to show is that we are going to be evaluating groundwater through all of these different indicators that I mentioned, groundwater levels, groundwater storage, water quality, and interconnected surface water. We are going to set a minimum threshold below which we consider ourselves unsustainable. And so we do not want to go below that minimum threshold. We will also be setting objectives for ourselves, which is where we want to see ourselves, where we want to go for each of these indicators. And then every year, we report to the state about how far we have, where we are in the process. What have we done? What are our groundwater levels looking like? We're going to be doing extensive monitoring. Every year, we report to the state. And every 5 years, we do a big update to the plan with a large report. And we compare where we said that we will be with where we actually are. So if we fail to achieve any of the dates set out by the state, so that means if we fail to get our plan written in time, if we fail to reach sustainability, or if we fail to maintain it after the 2042 deadline, the state will come in. And this is going to be the State Water Resources Control Board, and they have made it very clear what they will do. They will create a limit on pumping on all pumpers, and they will charge people for the use of their water. It's not going to benefit the community. It's going to be kind of the bare minimum that you can do to achieve some sort of reduction in groundwater use. We think we can do better than that. We know we can do better than that. And that is why we have been working so hard for the last couple of years on developing this plan. So there are actually 5 groundwater basins within Santa Cruz County, 3 of which are subject to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. The one outlined there in kind of the orangey red color, that's the Santa Margarita groundwater basin. Here it is a little closer in showing which towns are impacted by this. So basically it borders the east side of the San Lorenzo River. It encompasses all of the city of Scotts Valley and goes all the way up to Boulder Creek, encompassing kind of the Zayante and Lompico areas as well. This agency that I keep referring to is the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency. This agency was formed in 2017 to respond to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and to develop the groundwater sustainability plan for this groundwater basin. The agency is formed as a joint powers authority between 3 existing agencies, which are the San Lorenzo Valley Water District, the Scotts Valley Water District, and the County of Santa Cruz. There are also 5 board seats. So the board is actually made up of 11 people, 2 representatives from each of those agencies I mentioned, as well as 2 representatives that are here tonight representing private well owners and small water systems. The City of Scotts Valley, the Mountain Urban Association, and the City of Santa Cruz all also have 1 seat on the board. So now, why are you here? Where do private well owners fit into this process? Well, throughout the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, the law itself, you don't see a lot of references to private well owners, but what you do see is a lot of references to this term de minimis. A de minimis pumper is one that pumps 2 acre-feet a year or less for domestic purposes. And I did the math, that's nearly 1,800 gallons per day. So we have accepted at this agency that most private wells that are serving between 1 and 4 connections, 1 and 4 households, say, is likely to be de minimis because that is a safe assumption given how much water that is. So when I say this is you, that's who we're talking about, de minimis pumpers who are likely private well owners. Sigma exempts de minimis pumpers from metering. So if some of you are here today to find out if we are here to meter your wells, I can tell you we are not. We are not allowed to as a GSA. It does not exempt de minimis pumpers, though, from having to address any impacts that they are having either individually or cumulatively. I also want to point out that agricultural use, even if it's under 2 acre-feet per year, is not considered de minimis because it is not for residential or household use. So how are we looking out for the interests of private well owners at the groundwater agency? The first way is by having 2 private well owner representatives who are sitting on the board. And you'll hear from them later today and their goals and what they're working on and what they want to make sure that the rest of the board is aware of. We also have guiding principles. There's actually 14 guiding principles that you can find on the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency website. I've pulled out 2 that I think are of particular interest to private well owners. I'm not going to read them all, but I will read the part in bold. From guiding principle number 4, the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency is committed to the definition of de minimis and will explore opportunities to minimize any Sigma-related impacts to all groundwater extractors. And then guiding principle number 12 talks about finances. Financial contributions to support this work will be proportionately distributed among the agency membership and beneficial users based on the impact and benefits to the groundwater and surface water resources. And so what that's really getting at is that we're not going to be asking anybody to do any more than is their fair share or their responsibility of management of the basin. I did want to put up some information about the potential possibility for fees in the future. There are no restrictions of the agency in terms of the ability to charge de minimis users for some kind of extractor fee, similar to what happens down in the Pajaro Basin, where every well has an annual fee that is charged for management based on actual use or estimated use if they are not metered. Any fees that this board would decide to impose must be completely defensible and that they reflect scientifically established impacts and benefits. So it's not going to be based on hearsay or assumptions. It's going to be based on strong scientific data. And they will be proportional, as I said, to any impacts or benefits received. Any fees would also be subject to, and this is currently being figured out in other basins, but any fees are going to be subject to some sort of public scrutiny and review, either through Proposition 218 or Proposition 26. So, you know, before we could even get to the conversation of actually implementing fees, there would be a bunch of work that led up to that through a public process, and it would likely be subject to some sort of hearing or vote. Proposition 218 does not allow for subsidizing benefits. So what that means is that anybody who is receiving a benefit from the work of the groundwater agency, if anybody is paying for that, then everyone needs to be paying, because there cannot be any sort of subsidizing of any sort of fees. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the use of a groundwater model. So a groundwater model is a computer program that we can use to evaluate potential scenarios that we think may happen in the future. So for example, what kind of impacts do we expect to see to the groundwater from climate change? And what kind of impacts could we see if a number of larger pumpers or outside agencies or anybody decides to implement any project? So the reason that we do this is to help us try to estimate what the impacts and benefits that I spoke about earlier will be. The reason I'm putting this on this slide is because you're going to be hearing a lot about the groundwater model. And so I think it's important for you to understand why we talk about it so much. And it's really because it's going to help us understand the science. And then the board, the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency board, will then figure out how to translate the science into policy. And so as you hear the presentations moving forward, you will get a better sense of what that, you should keep in mind what this means. And again, the modeling will just help us understand if any proposed actions or inactions could threaten pumpers within the basin. So that's important for private well owners to understand that there's some real benefits to understanding what the actions of other people or agencies, what impacts they could have on you. We want to make sure through this agency that there's no chance that somebody else could overpump the basin to a level where your wells are running dry and you need to dig them deeper or do some other sort of very expensive intervention. I do want to let people know that this is a living document. We're going to be developing this document. It should be available in draft form for public review in 6 months. But again, like I said, this has a 50-year time horizon. And so we want to make sure people understand that this is a living document and there will be updates. And to kind of close out, I just want to say that by working collaboratively, we think that the Groundwater Agency can ensure that all groundwater users, including and especially private well owners, have access to long-term sustainable water supply. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite anybody who has any questions on my introduction to type them in the chat. So there is a chat feature on Zoom. You can type questions there. Anybody following along on Facebook Live, you can chat questions through the Facebook Live as well. Okay, I'll give it a minute. I'm not seeing any questions. Nick, are you guys down at headquarters seeing any questions in the chat yet?
I do see a couple folks typing. If we could maybe just give them about 1 or 2 more minutes.
Absolutely. And what about on Facebook? Are there any questions showing up there?
Looks like no questions on Facebook.
Okay.
There is one populated as of right now. Sierra, if you'd like to read that.
Yes. So I see one question from Anne Green. She was asking if the sandhills, you mean that, and I suppose you mean the ecosystems there with the sandhills have a voice or a seat on the board. What I would say to that question, the sandhills are a very unique habitat that we have here in the basin. They're not as sensitive to groundwater. They're not considered groundwater dependent ecosystems. And so they're not really going to be directly impacted by the work of the Groundwater Agency, although that is a very important question and consideration. Through our work at the agency, we are doing a lot of investigation and focus on groundwater dependent ecosystems and making sure that any action that we do as an agency or that any of the partner agencies are doing protect and benefit and hopefully improve the situation for all the threatened and endangered species that are dependent on groundwater in any way, whether they are living in a wetland or whether they're migratory species that just come through here but require that water coming either through base flow to the streams or through the creation of ponds or other wetlands. So with that, I hope that answered your question. I'm going to move on to the next one. The definition of de minimis users, another question that's come through. A de minimis user is a user that is pumping less than 2 acre-feet per year. That's which I did the math. That's about 1,800 gallons per day of water for basically residential or domestic purposes. So, not for agriculture, not for any commercial use or industrial use, but for your own residential household. That is the definition of de minimis. The current overdraft, that was another question that we got. What is the current overdraft and how long has it been stable? You're going to be hearing a lot about that, and you are going to see quite a few hydrographs in the next presentation. So I am going to put a pin in that one. A question about whether Happy Valley is within this, within the boundary. I do not believe Happy Valley does fall within this groundwater agency. However, if you want to follow up by sending an email to me or one of the private well owner representatives, there will be contact information available later on. And you give me the address, I can tell you for sure. A question about fee structure. So fee structure is now a conversation. Will deleterious impacts from water district pumping near private well owners be considered before calculating impact fees? Yes, any impact fees will take consideration of the impacts caused by individual, by user groups, by individuals, and by agencies. So that's actually something you're going to be hearing a little bit more about in our next presentation. And I'm going to take just the last couple of questions here. Frank Cheap, you asked a question about how to accurately determine the average consumption of a private well owner household, and that's a very good question. I think that actually does get addressed in one of the later presentations. So what I'm going to do is ask you to hold that question, and if it doesn't come up later, then please ask it again at the end when we have Q&A. A question to clarify if there is an intent to measure individual well water used for residential purposes. Again, if by that you're asking if there's an intent to meter water wells for private residences, there is not. We don't have that authority under this agency to put meters on private wells, although it's certainly something that you could choose to do and that we would encourage. And a question about when do we predict the decision about fees? That's a difficult one to answer because we haven't started that discussion yet. And I would suggest that you start attending some of these board meetings and you get in touch with your private well owner representatives to hear more about the time frame for that. Again, the draft plan will be out in likely July, August of 2021, which will have whatever structure we put in place. Even if there is not a fee structure in this first round, it doesn't mean that that's not something that the board might consider in the future. So it's important to stay engaged in the process. I do see there are a few more questions, but I would like to move on now. Actually, I think I got to everybody. I'd like to move on now to our next presenter, Georgina King. She is our technical consultant at the Groundwater Agency. She works with Montgomery and Associates. And Georgina, do you have screen sharing ability? And are you unmuted?
I am now, and I do have that ability. So I'm trying to pull that up. Do you see it in?
We're seeing your next slide notes as well. There you go.
Okay. Hi, everyone. As Sierra says, I'm a technical consultant, and the technical part is I'm a hydrogeologist. So I'm first a geologist, and I study water in the ground, basically. So this is a talk about groundwater in your well. And I'm hoping that you're going to learn something really interesting about groundwater in the Santa Margarita Basin, and that it'll help you understand the water that you pump out of your well every day. So what we're going to be covering tonight is who uses groundwater in the basin. It's as you know, it's not just you. And how do we know how healthy the basin groundwater supply is? What are the basin's aquifers and what condition are they in right now and historically? How and where are surface water and groundwater connected? This is one of the sustainability indicators that Sarah talked about is depletion of surface water that's connected to groundwater. And then what impact does private well pumping have on the basin? That's a big question. And so I'll try and touch on that. I only have 20 minutes or so, and I'm going to have to go through pretty quickly. So I'm known to take my time sometimes, right, Sierra? So I don't know how this, sorry?
I give you 25 minutes.
Oh, 25. Okay, here we go. I've already taken up 5, I guess. So here's a map of the basin. There's a lot going on this map, and it's really showing you all the users in the basin. So the kind of pinkish dots, circles that you see there are where all the municipal water supply wells are located. That's Mount Herman, San Lorenzo Valley Water District, Scotts Valley Water District. You see the little black dots everywhere. Those are where we think there are private wells based off available data that we have to us. There are also, there's one quarry now at Quail Hollow that is pumping groundwater. The other quarries are closed. There's a golf course that used to pump. Now it's closed. There was contamination remediation. They pump and treated contaminated water down here in southern Scotts Valley area for many years. That's also stopped. There are small water systems. So if they are supplying more than 5 connections or 5 or more connections, these kind of greenish areas are small water systems. Then there are the groundwater dependent ecosystems. Now that covers, this is a funny technical word that is part of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, but it's basically any plant or animal that relies on groundwater to live. It's also a user of groundwater, and these are all the beneficial users of groundwater. And we also have downstream surface water users. Now they're not a direct user of groundwater, but the groundwater in this basin very strongly influences the flow of surface water that you see in your creeks. And Santa Cruz, the city of Santa Cruz is a downstream user of water. In fact, they do have a diversion at Felton that they could take from. And so we have to acknowledge everyone's use of water and be fair about how it's used in the future if we're planning for sustainability. So this is a kind of cool map to show you. I'm going to talk about different aquifers now. Now, I'm not sure if this disorientates you, but here you have down here, this is a fault line, but it's where the San Lorenzo River runs pretty much. It's the Ben Lomond Fault, and it runs over here. And you have this huge, you have a mountain, what looks like a mountain here. It is a mountain it's mostly granite. That's outside of the basin. Inside of the basin here, you see how the rivers have cut down between these ridges, and to the north there is the Zayante Fault, and so that bounds the basin as well. And then to the east here we have the Santa Cruz Mid-County Basin, which already has a GSP, a groundwater sustainability plan. So these different colors are the different geologies that you would, if there were no trees, this is what it would look like. Not many people get to see the basin like this. And so I'm going to start telling you about the different formations that make up this, up the basin, and where is the groundwater actually? Where's the best groundwater? Well, this Purisima Formation in Santa Cruz caps all these hills here in the center of the basin. And these are not really not good for groundwater in this basin. In Mid-County Basin, that's where they get their water from, the Purisima. That's their principal aquifer. In this basin, it's not considered a principal aquifer. Any of you that have wells in here are probably gone through this into the Santa Margarita, which is much better as an aquifer. It's almost an ideal aquifer. This is what it looks like, right? It's when it crumbles, it looks like playground sand, and it does stand up in the sand hills, and this is what it looks like. You probably are all very familiar, and it's the yellow color that you see on the map. And this sandstone is what makes this basin so unique. The gray area that you see, which covers a good portion of the surface area of this basin, is, to put it bluntly, is not an aquifer. It's a rubbish aquifer. It's a shale. Who gets water out of a shale? But some people like Lompico, in the Lompico area, that's all they have. There are big areas where that's all that they have. And so they can pump a little bit. It can't pump more than just maybe for a house, a home. And so that's what covers a lot of the basin. And it's much more impermeable than sandstone is. And so when rain falls on it, it doesn't recharge very well. So this is not why we don't consider it a primary aquifer. It's not where most of the water of the basin is extracted from. Then we have the next important aquifer is the Lompico sandstone. Now it's only outcrop, you can barely see it, but it's in a thin ribbon up along this northern part, parallel to the Zayante fault. It is really deep. This basin is kind of like a bowl. It's higher on the sides where the faults are, and then it sinks down. It's a syncline. There's been a lot of warping of the geology with all the faulting that's happening, and it's created a syncline or a bowl, and that's where all the sediments are in that bowl. So the Lompico is only outcrops here, but a lot of the wells in the Scotts Valley area, if you drill through the Santa Margarita, you go through the Monterey, and below that you're going to get the Lompico sandstone. The Butano sandstone is in the blue colors, and that's another good aquifer, but it's more than 1,000 feet deep in most places of the basin, except for here where it's outcropping up in the hills. And there are people that have their private wells in there, and I'll show you some slides on that coming up here. There is a cross section. So if we were to cut the basin in half here, and this is what it's going to look like when you have those layers. It looks, like a bit like a cake, but they're all bent and twisted a bit. They've all been moved around by the faulting. But so up here on top here, not principal aquifers are these are the Purísima and the Santa Cruz mudstones that I said most of you would probably be drilling down into the Santa Margarita formation. Then you have quite a thick amount of shale. And that's why it costs much more money, obviously, to drill a well way down into the Lompico. And on the next slide, you'll see where your wells are in relation to the municipal wells. And then you get the Butano, which is way down here. If you look at the scale here, sea level is 0 around here. And if you will go from the land surface down to the Butano, it's well over 1,000 feet. Over here is where Scotts Valley Water District has some of their deepest wells, and they go down right here. And they're 1,400 feet deep, so they are pretty deep. If we look here at where your wells are, private wells are in black, and the municipal wells are in red. So here is an example in the middle of the cross section where a private well has gone through the mudstone, which is not, it's mud, so you can't get much water out of that. You're targeting sandstone. The Santa Margarita is a great option, and that's where a lot of wells are. As I mentioned, there are some wells where all there is Monterey, and that's where they have their wells. Then there are those wells up near the fault in the northern part of the basin where people are extracting water from the Butano sandstone. The municipal wells are all right now pumping from the Lompico or the Butano or both, like in this very deep well here where it's screened in both the Lompico and the Butano. No one is pumping, there's no municipal pumping happening in the Santa Margarita anymore. And so really the only people using that are our private well owners, and there may be some of the small water systems, and then a lot of the water that feeds the creeks seeps out of the Santa Margarita. So that's a good source. It's one of the major sources of water during the low flow or the summer months of flow in the creeks. Without that, the creeks would go dry. So that's also, a user there of water. They obviously don't have wells, but they are dependent on that groundwater to survive. So how do we know how healthy a basin's groundwater supply is? Well, the only way is to look in a well. And there are wells that the municipal wells are available for us to measure the groundwater level in, and then we also can take groundwater quality samples. So just take a sample and test it. I know that private wells, if you drill a new well, you have to take a once-off water quality sample, and that goes into a database. So we do have, with the county, we do have that. But what you see on this map are the colored dots are all those locations where we do have monitoring wells where we can measure groundwater levels and groundwater quality. There are also some here, the squares are ones that we are going to be drilling to fill some data gaps. But as you can see, there are still a lot of data gaps. The black dots, again, are all the private wells that we can determine from available data, but we don't have any monitoring data in those locations. So we can't tell you what the health is of the groundwater in your part of the basin because we don't have that window into looking into it. And so I think later on you're going to be asked if any of you would volunteer to help with the monitoring network. Allow your well to be the groundwater level just to be measured so we can tell what's happening. And as a private well owner, I would think that you would find this interesting because if that water level goes below your pump, and if you know where your pump level is, you would be able to know ahead of time what was going to happen in a say a 10-year drought or something like that. So anyway, when you take a measurement, you put a sounder down, electrical sounder, and when the sounder hits the water, it closes the electrical circuit and it makes a little beep. You can do it that way. That is actually, you disinfect that probe and you put it down and then you measure on it's a graduated tape on the cable, and then you can tell how deep it is. The county has also got a sonic kind of this gun thing. It will shoot down a sonic wave down there, and it will then tell you how deep the groundwater level, and that's much less invasive. So I think you're going to hear about that more. I'm not going to go into it more. But so we do need these wells to know how healthy the basin is. So the Santa Margarita, I'm going to try and go really quickly. The circles that you see here are, or these purple circles are where there are private wells that are probably pumping from the Santa Margarita. If it's hatched, it means that there's some other geology overlying it, but you still can probably people are still getting down there. That's why I have this whole area circled. And groundwater levels, so these are wells that we do know. This is the San Lorenzo Valley Water District well. We know what their groundwater levels. This is actually an elevation. This is the top of the well, and you have depth here. So the groundwater level is about 200 feet below surface. And this is what it's done. It fluctuates seasonally. Those are the little jagged things that you see. But generally, groundwater levels in this area have been great. Haven't declined or anything like that. Here, this is Olympia. There's been a slight decline over time. In an area over here, this is San Lorenzo Valley Water District. This is a special dedicated monitoring well. And there was a decline. When I say big, it's less than 100 feet decline. You'll see some larger declines. And then since then, it's pretty much leveled out. It has started, it looked like it recovered in 2017, and now it seems to be going down a bit. And so there are reasons for all of this. There was a lot going on in this area. There was the quarry, Hanson Quarry was pumping a lot of water. There was this huge drought. The colors you see here, the brown color means that it's very dry. And then the orange is just dry. The yellow is average and the blue is wet, so above average. And you can see that this impact of this 10-year drought here was significant, and the basin really hasn't recovered since. This is another well. I'm going to have to go through these quickly. This is Monterey. It's everywhere in the basin, underneath the basin, pretty much everywhere. And as you can see, there's a lot of wells here that are pumping from just the Monterey, probably. Again, in the South Scotts Valley area, this is a place where there was about 150-foot decline, or nearly 200 to 150 foot, and levels recovered a little bit, but are stabilized now. So there's no ongoing declines there. Lompico, the second number 2 aquifer, and that's also everywhere in the basin, but not many people private wells are pumping from it, just pretty much where it's exposed, because to get to it, you have to go very deep through the Monterey, and so there are only a few wells that are probably pumping from it. This is in the South Scotts Valley area where there's been that same decline that you saw, and then pretty much from about like 2008 onwards, it's been pretty stable. It has started to recover a small amount, but I think that's related more to the good rainfall we had in 2017. And so these are some other wells that don't have as long a record. Some of it is a bit strange data, but in general, we know there was this decline in the 90s, and in this case, it says continued. It probably has flattened out more recently. The Butana, that very deep aquifer, there are only 2 wells pumping from it that we know of. These are that are not in the outcrop area over here. These wells are pumping from it, as you'll see here. These wells are pumping from Butana. These are those deep 1,400-foot wells that Scotts Valley Water District relies on. And this is what that groundwater level looks like. It also declined, we believe. It was probably up a little higher. This is ground surface again, the dashed line. So what all this means, we use this model that Sarah was talking about to figure out the water budget. It's basically all the ins into the basin and all the outs of the basin. And so all the ins, the major in is the recharge that you get from rainfall. And that's about 57% of the inflow, total groundwater inflow into the basin comes from rainfall. Next into the basin is this stream bed recharge. So the creeks do also lose water into the groundwater aquifers, and that's about 36% of the inflows are from the creeks. There's smaller amounts of water that come from outside of the basin, and then system losses and return flows, things like septic systems and irrigation inefficiencies, that excess water we assume becomes recharged too. Those are smaller amounts. Hopefully John Rick is going to be talking about those next. And then, so where are all the outs? The major out of groundwater in this basin is not pumping. It is the flow from the groundwater into the creeks. So there's both flow into the creeks and out of the creeks, but by far, there's much more groundwater goes into the creeks than it receives water from the creeks. As you see, the number here is 21,500, and that's the streams are gaining, and then the streams are losing only nearly 9,000 acre feet per year. So much more, not just less than 3 times more is lost, goes from the groundwater to the creeks. Let me see what else there is here. Then there is a small amount of flow out. But at the end of the day, we do an accounting of the ins and the outs. And what we found is that there has been overall a loss of storage of about nearly 37,000 acre feet over over the period from 1985 to 2018. And that's 1985. Prior to that, there wasn't as much development. There wasn't that much demand. Groundwater levels that we know of in 1985 were probably close to where they were pre-development, maybe a little lower, but that's all we have data for. They only started really collecting data after 1985. So that's something a little bit on the overdraft. It gives you, it's not an exact overdraft, but it gives you an idea, and that is over the entire basin. But as I'll be showing you next, that there are parts of the basin where the storage change, the loss of groundwater in storage has been much more. For example, here in the Lompico Aquifer, there are 3 different areas here. We've broken the basin up into 3 areas because we know that there is one area where there's been the biggest decline. From those hydrographs, those groundwater levels we showed you, that we have a good idea where most of the water has been lost. And it's in the South Scotts Valley area. Mount Hermon is South Scotts Valley. And that's where you see the biggest decline happening. So this orange line corresponds to this orange area over here. The pink area, North Scotts Valley, it has much less of a decline. And then this area out here where there's not many people at all pumping in the Lompico, it hasn't declined at all. Santa Margarita responds readily to rainfall. So you see these, it does, when there's good rainfall, it fills up very nicely, and it doesn't seem to have a problem. The Butano is similar. It has some losses. So we do know that most of the issue with the loss of storage and groundwater levels is in this area where you see the star. I'm going to touch quickly on groundwater quality. How am I looking for time, Sierra?
You've got about 1 minute, but you can go a couple minutes longer, and we'll save Q&A for the end.
Okay, so I'm just going to say groundwater quality is good. I'm going by this. There is some high iron and manganese. I mean, the municipal suppliers, they do treat for that. There is nitrate in groundwater. John Rick is going to talk more about that. It's safe to drink, but it does have impacts on San Lorenzo River. So I'm going to fly by that one. Surface water and groundwater. So like I've been talking to you already, you've heard me say gaining stream and a losing stream. If groundwater is higher, levels are higher than the stream, then the groundwater flows into the stream. If it's lower, it loses out of the stream into groundwater. We also have areas where the Monterey and the Santa Margarita contact each other, and we get springs and seeps. And in this area, you see the yellow that overlies the gray. This purple line I've drawn is where there are a lot of seeps, and that feeds the flow in the Zayante and Lompico creeks here, and also along Bean Creek as well. And there is one stretch of Bean Creek that goes dry, but otherwise, pretty much the rest of the basin, it flows year round. So what we've done with the model is that we started to look at what are the impacts of private pumping on the basin. Hypothetically, this is nothing that we hope will happen, but we took out private pumping and said, now what would the basin have looked like if we took out private pumping? As you can see, and this is just in the areas where we have monitoring wells, it ranges from 4 feet to barely any impact. But this is, I think you're going to have this in you can download this presentation. You can have a look at this in great detail, but there is a few feet change that happens if you took out all these black dots and you didn't have them pumping.
Georgina, I just want to interrupt to let you know that John Ricker will cede some of his time to you, so you don't need to rush through everything if you want to make sure that you're making all the points.
Okay. This one, yeah, I think I'm okay with this. Now I'll go a little slower because it gets a little more information here to digest. So here we looked at when we took out the pumping, private well pumping, what happened to the the flow to the creeks. How much more groundwater flowed into the creeks? And what we found throughout the whole basin is that there was so we took out the pumping, and these blue bars are the pumping. So these are by aquifer. Each of these is a different aquifer here. And you can see there is quite a lot of wells pumping in the Monterey, because there are just a lot of wells pumping there. And then the orange is the return flows. So that's the flows that go back to the aquifer from irrigation, landscape irrigation, what little there is, and septic losses. So once we take those out, we see this increase in flows to groundwater. It's a total of 240. It's not very much. It equals about 0.3 CFS, which is very low, especially considering it's throughout the whole basin. Okay, now this is quite complicated, but what this is saying is that, and this is just for Bean Creek now, we just took one watershed because there are a lot of private wells on either side within this watershed. So we looked at taking out the private well pumping, and we saw that if the private wells weren't there, having the private wells there reduces that flow to the creeks by about 1.8%, or about 0.06 cubic feet per second, which is very small. Compared to if we took out all the wells, everyone's wells, private wells, the quarries, the remediation that happened. This is historical. This is in the past that we're doing this over. And the municipal wells, everyone, we turned everyone off and turned all the return flows, all those flows that go back into the aquifer from septics or from system losses or irrigation or anything like that. We took that. So so no one ever was on this basin, lived in this basin. Then the flows would, having the pumping has reduced the flows by about nearly half a CFS. So that gives you an idea of the relative scale of that. And it really isn't very much, but the green lines on this bar are showing you that these in the low flow months, in the lowest flow, when the creek is at its lowest, groundwater in the green is contributing a lot of water to the creek, up to about 4.5 CFS. On a very wet year, it's up to about 4. And so that half a CFS, is that a lot, or is that, what does that mean for the fish? And so this is a question that we still are pondering, and we still have to look into. So what are the areas of concern in the Santa Margarita Basin? This is kind of a summary slide, is that part of the basin has had up to 200-foot groundwater level decline. But since about 2010, it's stabilized. Those largest declines are seen in the Lompico Aquifer, south of Bean Creek, in the Mount Herman, South Scotts Valley area. And that there have been a little bit smaller declines in north of Bean Creek in the Olympia and Mission Springs sub-area. And now these lowered groundwater levels have reduced the amount of groundwater flowing into the creeks. From that last slide, you can see that when you take out pumping, you get more water flowing to the creeks. And those, the largest reductions in groundwater level contribution, the flow to the creeks, are in Bean Creek and also parts of San Lorenzo River itself. We are seeing that there are some impacts from private wells and all wells on the San Lorenzo. There are smaller reductions in the Sayante watershed. And I think I'm going to stop there, Sierra. I have said a lot, and I would like to take questions if possible for a few minutes. Sierra, you're muted.
I'm working on it. Just give me one moment. All right, Sherry, you got host now. You are still muted.
There we go. All right, thank you. Sorry, I muted myself in case I was creating any background noise, and then I did not have the authority to unmute myself again. So I'm looking out for questions related to Georgina's presentation. Again, there will be another opportunity for Q&A at the end of the meeting, and the slides will be available on the website after the meeting, probably tomorrow. So if questions come up after you have a chance to think about things, ruminate, and you review the slides, you can always contact the private well owner representatives or myself with questions, and we can respond to you at a later time. So I have a question here. So Jeff Koopman, who is one of the well owner representatives, was asking about who asked for why did we do this study of having no private well owners in the basin.
Why?
Yeah.
Okay. So without the groundwater model, it is very hard to determine relative impacts. And so having, this is a theoretical exercise, is what happens in the basin if we take out different things. That's the beauty of the model. You can do these different scenarios and see what the impacts on groundwater levels are. And so this is the only tool that we have. There is no other graphing or paper exercise that you could do to the complexity of the groundwater model to be able to answer these questions. So these are kind of what if situations, and we use them to test the model, well, to interrogate the model to see, how the basin responds to changing conditions.
Right, and there was a question, and I actually think this might be discussed a little bit in John's presentation coming up next, but it was about how can we calculate the private well owner impacts when we don't have a precise inventory of where all the private wells are and what their consumption rates are.
Mm-hmm. Well, without wells being metered, and we don't know that, but we do know some wells are metered, and these are the small water system wells. They are required to report to the county because they're producing more water than 2 acre-feet per year, and so they report, and we just assume that based on the number of connections they have, their use should be kind of typical or similar to what your private well owner uses, and so we make that inference based off that data. Where wells are is up to well permits that are available. That's not every single well that's out there, but we also look at land use to see where there are residences that we know are not being supplied water by the municipal suppliers. So those are the tools that we have, or the information that we have to kind of come up with our best guess of where the private wells are.
Okay, and there was another very similar question to that afterwards, so I'm going to move on to, are we comparing the increased population and building throughout the watershed with the decline in groundwater levels? So population and development versus groundwater levels.
Yes, we have looked at that, and in fact, in the early time when there was that decline in groundwater levels, there was both an increase in population. It was also a 10-year drought, which exacerbated it by far. And there were a lot more different users. The quarries were going, there was contamination being pumped out of the ground, treated, and people also used a lot more water in those days. There weren't, water efficient appliances, and so all of that combined, there was a lot more water use. And we do have, I didn't include it here, I probably should have, but there's a groundwater usage chart, and you can see how it peaked and it's really the groundwater usage has dropped off from about 2000, even though there has been a small population increase. The usage is and municipal usage is projected to be demand is projected to be fairly flat. It's only going to increase a very small amount in the future because all of water conservation and people being more aware of water usage.
So there's a specific question about the Ben Lomond area, Alva Road. I don't know how familiar you are with the geography, but they were wondering what aquifer are they using?
I'm not familiar with it, no.
Yeah, so
you can ask John Ricker, he would know.
He might know, and any site-specific questions, you can contact me later, and I can work with you a little bit further on that. There's one person who asked a question, and I'll just respond to this. Are we doing anything about the impact from people living on rivers who are pumping from the river? So people who live along a riparian corridor have riparian rights to use water. That is not something that's addressed by this agency. That is something that is overseen by the State Water Resources Control Board. And this being a groundwater sustainability agency, we aren't working directly on surface water users, other than that legal surface water users are considered a beneficial use of the basin because, as Georgina was saying, healthy groundwater levels feeds water to the streams. I'm going to ask one more question that I think is relevant to you, Georgina, and then I'm going to hold the rest until after John's presentation, because I think some questions will be answered by him. So the last question is, are the currently running quarries water systems, are they metered?
No, they are not metered. No, we also make a guess on their usage. So there is a definite some assumptions that we have to make for a fair bit of water usage in the basin. The only metering that happens is the small water systems and the municipal wells.
Thank you. So now we're going to move on to John Ricker. You're there?
Can you hear me?
We can. Excellent. So John Ricker also works for the County of Santa Cruz, and this is his last stakeholder meeting as an employed person. So we should all be very excited to have him here and take advantage of him being available to ask questions or answer questions.
Okay, well, I've got two different computers going here. I am also a private well owner. I live up in the Soquel Hills and my power went out tonight. So I'm not at my normal workstation. And the connection isn't that great. So I thought I'd try one computer, but I guess that's not what Nick wants me to use. So I'm going to try to switch to the other computer. Because I'm actually in by phone so that you can hear me better, because the internet connection is not so good. Well, we can try it and see what happens. I can always turn it off, but let me see if I can share my screen here. Oh, it looks like I'm disabled from screen sharing on both my computers.
John, go ahead and try now. I'm not sure which one of yours is which here on the technical side, but the one that does have your name on it should be enabled.
Let's see.
This is all the joys of a Zoom meeting.
Oh gosh, where is it?
All right, got you up on video now.
Okay, but I'm not finding my presentation on the list. That's curious. Let's see if this works. Well, that is odd.
Well, Let me know if you want me to share it through my screen, and you can just tell me when to click.
Yeah, I think the problem is I got way too many windows open on this machine because I don't think I'd share. Do you have another one you can try to turn on, Nick?
Another computer?
Well, let me see if I can share the screen on this other computer.
You know what? I think that probably the best way to move forward on this, just in the interest of time here, I'm going to actually pass it to Sierra because it sounds like she's ready to go. And I know it's, but if you could just tell her when to push the slide forward, I'm sure to do that. Sierra. Yep. Okay, Sierra, you're up. Go ahead and do your thing. And John, we still got you on video and coming in by phone.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. Are people seeing
So
my
I'm going to talk a little bit more about private wells in the basin, and won't be as technical, hopefully, as Georgina, but we rely a lot on her information to really help us sort all this stuff out. So I'm going to give you sort of a higher level view of it, and we'll go from there. Go ahead, Sierra. Again, you've seen this map before. All the little black dots in the basin are the private wells. There's about 780 private wells in the Santa Margarita Basin. Again, private wells are anything that's serving essentially 4 connections or less. Anything with more connections is a small water system. So I'm going to go over just sort of how we look at the pumping and the return flow, what the proportion of pumping is, and then some of the other issues of groundwater recharge and water quality impacts. Go ahead. So this is a nice chart that Georgina prepared for us to look at, and it shows essentially what the various components are that we look at when we look at the impacts of private well pumping. We pump out of the basin, and the water goes to our house. Some of it gets used indoors, and some of it gets used within the house. The indoor use is about 70% of the total pumping, and the outdoor use is 30%. All of our indoor use essentially goes into the septic system. About 90% of it goes into the septic system. And most of that percolates on down into the soil. It doesn't all make it to the water table. It depends on the underlying geology, the soils, the vegetation, how deep your leach field is. But we do estimate that a significant portion of it will percolate down and eventually reach the groundwater table. The percentage that reaches the groundwater table depends on your underlying geology. If you're located on the Santa Margarita sandstone, the most permeable of formations, almost 60% of that gets down to the water table. But the amount falls off depending on which other geology your house is located over. And then some of your outdoor use, particularly if you overwater your plants, that will percolate down, and again, a portion of that eventually reaches the water table. So the good news is not all the water that you pump out of the ground is a loss to the basin. A good chunk of it percolates back into the basin, and we do take that into account when we calculate, when we do the modeling and we look at the impacts. Go ahead, Sierra. So this is just some of the numbers. The average water use figure we're using right now is about 0.39 acre feet per year. Acre feet is the standard unit that we use for managing groundwater. An acre foot is essentially the volume of water of 1 acre of land covered 1 foot deep with water. And some of those figures that Georgina showed you earlier gave you some sense of what overall water usage is in the basin, and I think my next slide will do that as well. You know, you asked, the question came up, how do we know how much private well users are using? We make estimates. We do have meters on all the small water systems that are out in the rural parts of the county and in the basin. So we do have figures on typical water usage for rural properties, some of which are very similar, or many of which are very similar to most private well properties. Some people do have meters. I actually have a meter on my well, and I read that thing once a week, and I get a pretty good sense of how much water I'm using. And it's within this range. Some people use more, some people use less. It all depends on, how much irrigation you do, whether you've got a big garden or a little garden or landscaping or whatever. People that live in the redwoods that have hardly any landscaping, they're probably using half that amount. The people that are in sandy areas with a lot of landscaping may be using quite a bit more than that 0.39. Now, the average return flow is about 0.24 acre feet per year. That's the water that's percolating from your septic system and from your irrigation. And of that amount, about 0.15 ultimately ends up recharging the basin. So the overall net impact, average net impact of pumping is about 0.24 acre feet per year. Now, we also hear a lot about recharge. A lot of the folks out in the country are very proud that they are putting water back into the basin through recharge. Recharge is a natural process. It can be interrupted by development. So the average natural recharge in the Santa Margarita portion of the basin is about 1.75 acre feet per year, which is really almost 1 3/4 foot of water per year on average going back into the aquifer. However, when you develop a parcel, you create impervious surface with your roadways, your driveways, your patios, your roofs. So you don't get all that recharge. So the potential loss of recharge from developing a 1 acre parcel is about 0.28 acre feet per year. So you lose a little bit of that when you develop it. This is looking at overall basin pumping. I see Sierra's moving me along. The total basin pumping is almost 3,000 acre feet. This is figures from 2018. And you can see the large water systems are pumping about 81% of that total. Small water systems, which are 5 to 199 connections, they're pumping about 3%. The private domestic wells are 11%, and then other private wells, non-domestic, the quarry, ponds, and other irrigation areas are using about 6%, pumping about 6%. This is the amount pumped, not necessarily the amount used. This is the total pumping. Go ahead, Sierra. So what are the impacts of the rural development and private well use? We've talked about the pumping effects, potential effects on groundwater levels and stream flow. Increased runoff can occur again from the impervious surface and reduce recharge. That increased runoff can also cause erosion and then sedimentation of the creek. So that's another thing that we want to watch out for. And then there's water quality impacts. Although septic systems are great for promoting groundwater recharge, they also have pathogens, nitrogen, and other constituents. And we pick those constituents up in the groundwater and also in the San Lorenzo River. So we know that the septic systems are contributing nitrate and various constituents of emerging concern. Those are pharmaceuticals, things like artificial sweeteners. They move right through the system and end up in the river. So that is a concern, and we are working on updating our septic system regulations requirements to provide higher levels of treatment, particularly in these very sandy soils where a lot of the constituents can move through the soils and not get as much treatment as they do in other types of soils. Go ahead, Sierra. So the modeling that Georgina talked about, what can we learn about the impacts of private pumping from modeling? And what you saw today was very preliminary. I think Sierra and Georgina and I saw that for the first time maybe last night. So it's still very much a work in progress. We don't have all the answers yet, and we may not have all the answers within a year from now. It may take more monitoring and more assessment as we go forward. But some of the things we might find out that some areas of private pumping near a specific stream could be having a more significant impact on stream flow. We may see that there are some areas where there are private wells that in the future may go dry under some of the climate scenarios that we're seeing. We're definitely looking at more frequent and longer droughts. So the modeling will help us assess those impacts. We may see that there's no real impact right now from private well pumping. In fact, the preliminary results look like the impact is pretty low to moderate, if it's even significant. So, but again, when we introduce the future climate scenario, the drier climate, that impact may start to look more significant. And again, the results may be inconclusive, and it may take a lot more time and more monitoring, more data. We do plan to install a number of additional monitoring wells and stream gauges to better understand what's going on. The plan will get assessed and reevaluated and updated every 5 years, so it will give us a chance to modify our direction and our findings and our recommendations. Go ahead, Sierra. Another question that comes up is what are the potential benefits to private well users? And this is just a couple of them. Better management of the basin provides for more stable or improved groundwater levels that will help prevent wells from going dry. It can also stabilize or actually increase stream flows if we're able to restore some of our groundwater levels. Will help us maintain these thriving groundwater-dependent ecosystems that many of us appreciate out there. Basin management also opens up more potential for you to obtain technical assistance and well level monitoring. The county does offer a program where we'll come out and measure the levels in your well if it's suitable for measurement, and give you an indication of what the trends may be in your well as we monitor it, generally twice a year. That's a voluntary program, and if you'd like us to do that, you can contact Sierra for additional information. The other big thing with SGMA, and I'm sorry I missed the first part of Sierra's presentation, but hanging over us is the state. If we don't do our job managing the basin, the state will come in and do it for us. And they've already said they're going to charge everybody a fee that's pumping water from the basin for the benefit of having the state oversight. So if we do a good job, we don't have the state coming in and doing that to us. So that's the quick summary of some of the broader issues that we look at. Again, a lot of it's a work in progress. I don't know if we have time for questions right now, or if you want to wait further to the end. But one of the questions I had for folks out there is, have you seen impacts to your wells or other places in the basin that you're concerned about?
All right. So I'm going to try to, that was the end of your presentation, right, John?
That was.
Okay, good. So thank you. I think we could take a couple minutes for questions if people have questions specifically for John. And let me read, there's a long one here that I want to read out loud. So it's someone here representing neighbors on Upper Two Bar Road, which is north of Boulder Creek. And it looks like it's off the map, so it might not be within the basin boundary. She had been assuming that they are part of the basin, though they're not on the maps. Their homes are at 900 to 1,300 feet, so they're up on the hills, and they've been worried about water level drops due to use in the valley that might drop. It might impact the surrounding people who depend on the aquifers. And so they were wondering who they should contact about whether they're outside of the groundwater agency. So I don't know, John, do you want to respond to the concerns for people who might be outside the basin boundary but concerned about the activities within the basin?
Sure. And getting back to that earlier question, both Upper Two-Bar and Alba Road are outside of the basin. And they're probably not really impacted or influenced by activities within the basin. The basin is relatively self-contained by the faults that border the basin. Both those areas have very different geology than what's in the Santa Margarita Basin. Upper Two-Bar is much older, hard sandstones and shales. It's not really considered a groundwater basin. Groundwater occurs there in fractures. You're going to be more influenced by potentially your neighbor's well up in that basin than what's going on over in the Santa Margarita Basin. The Alba Road areas, a lot of that's drilled into decomposed granite, which can hold a fair amount of water, but the water occurs more shallow and it can be depleted during drought periods. But there are not active management activities outside of the three major groundwater basins that we have in the county.
All right, thank you. There was a question from Anita Dyer, which I'm going to read to everybody, asking if the Zoom, this will be available on the website, and it will. I should have said that earlier. The slides will be available if you want to dig into them, but we are recording this presentation. It's going to be available to watch on our website, or if you'd prefer, you can also watch the recording on Facebook Live. So that's information I should have said right up front at the beginning. And then we have someone, Jay Maxwell, thanking John for your decades of excellent leadership and straight talk, which I think we can all agree with. I have a question here from Facebook that I'm going to have to read, not quite directly looking at the screen. So John, this one will be for you. If Scotts Valley is drawing down the basin and continues to approve building projects, and they mentioned that there are 8 under construction, 8 approved, and 6 under review. In order to increase revenues, will they be assessed additional fees accordingly for adding population and additional draw?
The way that we're paying for a lot of this now, the good news is we have grants for a lot of this, but before we got the grants, we were dividing the costs up based on water usage primarily. So Scotts Valley Water District has been paying a share based on their share of the basin water usage, and San Lorenzo has been paying based on their share of the water usage, and then the county has been paying basically 10% of the cost to cover the rest of the users in the basin. Going forward, we haven't really gotten to the point of how costs would be specifically divided up, but the guiding principle is that costs are divided based on either impact on the basin, which is related to water use, and or benefit received. I mean, that's required under Prop 218 and Prop 26. So we will be bound by those with any future allocation of costs. And that would, if the water usage goes up, then the contribution would likely go up.
Thank you. Yeah, I do recommend everyone take some time to review the guiding principles, because I think you will find that a lot of your concerns are clearly stated in the principles as something that the board has their fingers on the pulse of and are concerned about as well. Okay, so I'm not seeing any more questions for John's presentation. So now we're going to turn it over to Angela Franklin and Jeff Koopman and Eden Cassidy, our private well owner representatives on the board, to talk a little bit more about what they're doing and how to be a good steward of the basin. So, Angela, do you have screen sharing ability yet? Oh, Angela is muted. May I unmute you? Oh, no, I can't. Sorry, bear with us while we transfer power.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Let me try to share. Okay, can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys. So again, I'm Angela Franklin. I am one of the private well owner representatives. So I'm going to start off the private well owner section, and then I'm going to pass it off to Eden and Jeff to elaborate on their sections. But I just want to talk about ways to be a good citizen of the aquifer. And I know a lot of this information is stuff that you guys probably already know, and some of it, John went over a little bit, but we just kind of wanted to bring it up as a little bit of a refresher. And then hopefully there's a few new tidbits in there that you guys can take away, and then also some links to some really helpful resources. So we're going to talk about resource management, which is the water, managing the water, erosion, habitat, and streams, well maintenance, road maintenance, some private well owner concerns that we have received from various private well owners in addition to our own concerns. There is one letter from a public member who couldn't make the meeting that he asked we could read it during this meeting, so we will do that. And then just staying informed and some helpful information resources for you guys for future use. So resource management. So going back to managing the aquifer, we're all in this together. We're all looking for a shared goal. In Scotts Valley Water District, San Lorenzo, they've put in some really great efforts into conserving our precious resource, which is water. But as private well owners, we tend to, I feel, because I know I did this, definitely we're a little bit closer to the source, I want to say, because we are actually pumping water from our own property and we are involved in the whole process. So I feel like we're a little bit more aware. But just in case you're not, managing the water is part of being a responsible citizen in, the Santa Margarita. So installing low flow fixtures, which, now is required for new developments, but a lot of the properties in the Santa Margarita are older properties, so they don't have these, really efficient fixtures. So installing low flow fixtures is definitely helpful. Drought tolerant landscaping. I know I had a huge front lawn and a huge back lawn. I pulled that out and put in, drought tolerant landscaping and areas that will allow the water to basically soak back into the ground. So keeping water where it falls is really important. And I know that there's some initiatives with, I know some people had some questions about, new developments and housing and things like that. And there are some regulations that basically require that the water that falls on that property stays on that property. And that's things that we can do with our own property, as you can see from the pictures below. People that basically have put in these kind of percolation or swale ponds to allow the water to stay in this one area and then percolate back down into the aquifer. Similar to like our septic tanks, eventually allow that water to percolate back down into the aquifer. Having rain barrels is actually a good idea as well. That way, you're not having to pump the water out of your well. You're using the water that's falling onto your house or driveways or whatever, and then using that to water, especially during, our summer seasons where we don't really get a lot of rain. Slow it, spread it, and sink it. That kind of goes back to keeping the water where it falls. We obviously don't want it to move too quickly, because if it moves too quickly off of your property, then it's harder to manage. So creating little environments that allow the water to kind of spread out over your property and then slowly sink back down into the aquifer is definitely ideal. There's a website called rcdsantacruz.org, which is full of tons of information. You could probably read that website for a week because there's so much information on there, but there's some really great links, resource documents, contact information about resource management, about, being a responsible private well owner. I definitely recommend going and checking that out. Erosion, habitat, and streams. This is another important area, and I know John mentioned this a little bit in his presentation, but maintaining our property is definitely important as part of a private well owner. As we've seen in some of our previous winters, we live in the mountains, we have hills, we have, steep terrain, and managing our property properly is definitely very important to making sure that our aquifer and our ecosystem is maintained properly. So if you live in a really hilly area, you may want to put in some terraces. I know the use of plastics is actually quite common, and it can be beneficial if you've done it correctly. But if you don't use plastics correctly, it can actually make the problem worse. And it's better actually to try to use, biomaterials instead. So like bark or cardboard, or even just plants. Plants are fantastic for, just visually appealing, but also for maintaining the soil. And then also helping the soil kind of maintain the moisture. Proper road maintenance is another huge one. We've seen a lot of private roads in addition to public roads around the area that definitely do not have proper drainage, proper culverts, ditches, and then the water ends up pooling or it causes further erosion. Ideally, you would want to manage your road in a way that allows the water to, again, go back into kind of a swale where it can then percolate back into the ground and not cause any erosion or any other issues. Being mindful of what you are using on your property and in your property. Like John mentioned, septics are actually really fantastic, but if they're not maintained properly, they can actually cause a lot of problems with nitrates and other type of things that get put in there. So you definitely don't want to be using a lot of cleaners, medications, paint, fertilizers, obviously, pesticides and motor oils. You really want to try to dispose of those properly and limit the usage if possible, especially, around any type of water source or your well, anything like that. And then not hindering streams. We have a lot of little tiny streams that end up flowing into Bean Creek or San Lorenzo. You don't want to alter those in any way. You don't want to dam them up. You don't want to alter the flow or dump anything in or near them that could cause any issues. Like we always see the little signs that say, this goes right into the ocean. Well, it not only goes into the ocean, but it definitely does seep back into the ground and can cause issues if we don't pay attention to that. Maintenance is always important for your well. We definitely highly recommend an annual well maintenance check in terms of like bacteria, water quality. If you have any weird smells or the water starts turning brown, like in that bottom picture, you definitely want to take quick action to make sure that's remediated. Routine maintenance checks, checking your well cap cover, making sure it's clean, your filters, your pumps, all of that stuff is clean, making sure the electrical is, well maintained and properly covered, and keeping the area around your well clean and clear. If you have a lot of trees or debris, that during a storm that can end up causing issues or causing leaks, making something break, which is never good. Monitor changes, and if anything changes, fix it immediately. I think it's John who I've heard previously. He says he has a little light on his well, so he knows like how often his well is actually pumping. So it's kind of good to have these visual indicators on your well, so you kind of know like, okay, it's running a little bit more frequently than it used to, so maybe I should go check on that. Being able to see your water levels if you have a holding tank, continually making sure that you're paying attention, like I mentioned, to any odors, colors, things like that. You definitely want to make sure that you get those taken care of properly. And if you have to, make sure you use a qualified professional if you're just not sure. And keeping logs is an ideal situation as well. I can't remember sometimes what I ate for breakfast yesterday. So keeping a log of, okay, here's where my well was 3 weeks ago or 6 months ago or 2 years ago. I've lived here almost 20 years now. So I honestly, if I didn't have a log, I wouldn't be able to tell you anything about my well from a year ago. So it's ideal just to kind of keep those logs so you have a reference to go back to, just to make sure that everything's working correctly. So I'm going to pass this over to Jeff Koopman, and he's going to go over some concerns from us as private well owners, in addition to other private well owners that we've spoken to.
And while we're making that transition, I just, there was a question that came up that I just thought I could answer right now. Somebody asked where people can get their water tested at a reasonable price, and we actually offer that at the county. You can go to the environmental health webpage and you can find the link to the water quality lab, and they can give you their fee schedule, which is very reasonable for testing your well, and they can tell you what you need and provide you the sampling equipment and everything. So that's certainly something that you can do there, or you can look around and see if there's some other labs that offer those services, but I doubt they would be more affordable than the one we have at the county.
Okay, hi there. I'm Jeff Koopman. I'm the alternate on the in the private well owners group. Basically, the way they have it set up is that there's two primary members of the group, and then if one of them can't make it to a meeting, then I actually get to talk and ask questions and vote in those meetings. But mostly that doesn't happen. However, I'm going to start off on talking about some final notes for the typical concerns of private well owners, and this is the one that's probably the one that was most important to me. I think I have control over the slides here based on the button message I just got. Nope, I don't have control. Go next slide. How do we go to the next slide? Oh, I just click. Okay. So this is a poorly done slide, but it's basically to show you a portion of a graph where the water levels were declining, the hydrographs that Georgina had on earlier. I moved here kind of on the left side of the slide. I'm sorry. I'm Jeff Koopman. I've been here for 30. I'm in my 39th year up here at Blockhart Gulch. I'm an engineer by trade. I love water, everything about water. I'm a hobbyist about it, so I get excited about all these things. I love Georgina's presentations. And so what the news we had gotten out of the newspaper was that the water levels were plummeting, and we were very concerned watching, the growth going on around here. And we were scared that we were going to run out of water because other people had deeper straws in the aquifer than we had. So it was pretty concerning. But getting involved in this, we kind of clicked on it. Next slide. Getting involved in this, we've learned a little bit of some new information, which is that basically water levels, like Georgina mentioned before, have stabilized overall. So we were really, actually, this was good news to me. Things are fairly stable, and they're not going to they don't look like they're getting a lot worse than they are right now. So most people are functional at their current situation. So this is overall fairly good news, and we're happy to hear this, because with all the construction going on, we've been worried and such. But you can go ahead and go to the next slide. I'm trying to move fast. This is the picture that we've been shown quite a bit that's helping to convince us of what's going on. The pumping levels increased dramatically from when development began into around the year 2000. There was a lot going on, industrial wells with the sand quarries, and a lot of private pumping, and people weren't using efficient fixtures, and there was a lot of growth. So the pumping was increasing dramatically. But what happened then was people became aware that we were having problems with the water consumption, and there's been a lot of reduction in water consumption for various reasons. The quarries dropped off. Both San Lorenzo Valley and Scotts Valley have instituted conservation measures, and there's a little bit more usage of surface water, which isn't shown in this picture, but it is part of the picture here. So we've been able to curtail some of the pumping, and that helps keep help to stabilize the water situation. So this was additional good news. Go ahead and go to the next one. So another thing we discovered recently, actually, is that we're a little bit compartmentalized here in the Santa Margarita Aquifer. They're not all interconnected together. So even though we've heard news that the one under Scotts Valley is fairly dried out, the other Santa Margarita aquifers are relatively isolated, and Georgina's assured us are not likely to be drained out. So we're happy. That's good news for us also. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Plus, there's other things that are being worked on. And as part of this group, we're working on some action plans for the area basin-wide. And some of the probably the best features that are coming up are conjunctive use and in lieu recharge. And I wanted to describe what those mean. Basically, what that says is it's the idea that we're going to share water between systems so that we can make more use of surface water and so pump less groundwater. What this allows us to do is rest the wells in the areas that would have been used more frequently, rest them a little bit, not use them so much, allow the water to naturally recharge a little higher and slowly build those reserves back up. And this is taking there's some steps that we have to go through to get permits to do this, but basically San Lorenzo Valley Water District is going to start sharing water inside of its system between its different sections. That's part of this. And then also San Lorenzo Valley and Scotts Valley are talking about sharing water, which is going to help Scotts Valley reduce some of their pumping and allow them to recover some of their water levels. And there may be some Santa Cruz in the mixture there too, potentially in the future. So overall, that was good news. It looks like things are, to me, this was really important because we had a viewpoint some time back that we were getting our water pumped out from underneath of us. And in summary, it looks like that's not the case, that things are stable. There's plans in the works to make things improve from where they are now. And we probably will be okay, aside from, of course, some future drought that's going to be horrendous, but everyone has to deal with that anyways. Go to the last slide, I think, the next slide. Okay, so in summary, your water seems generally secure, and that's important to me. You may want to consider getting some water storage capacity. All new construction, and when you get permits, you have to do this anyways, is to get these large tanks. But some of the older parcels don't have this. But you might want to consider doing that because obviously, because of the fire danger, you want to have water tanks on your lot for providing water to the fire trucks when they show up, and that's very important. And then also during the next mega drought, which it's not if, it's when, you want to have some storage capacity on your property so that you can have water tenders come up and fill your tanks up. I have neighbors, I know people who already have to do this up near the summit. They have to do this almost every year, or at least in the dry years. And all of us need to have some water storage capacity so that we can, those of us who are small systems, so that we can get through these hard times. It might come sometime in the future, hopefully a number of years out. That's pretty much all I have to say.
Okay, I'm Eden Cassidy, and hopefully I can rely upon Jeff to forward the slides when I'm ready, since this is a little foreign to me. But I've lived here in unincorporated Santa Cruz off and on, just outside of Scotts Valley, since 1980. And I manage a residential well that I share with two neighbors. I can give you some of my measurements. We're at 425 feet deep. We've got static water level at 193 feet and a 3 horsepower pump at 378 feet that provides 16 gallons a minute. And we have 15,000 gallons of storage. My household is about a 307 gallon per day household, but we do sometimes take long showers. Mm-hmm. So we, being involved in this has forced me to learn all of these details and to be conscious of things more so, and also sort of dig in about protecting not only our property rights, but our water rights as owners of land with private wells. A lot of you may be here or may have heard about this event because you got an envelope that put a scare into you in the mail from Environmental Health, and wanted to make sure that once you pulled it out and saw our names on the letter from Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency, that you understood that no consideration was given or received by us as private well owners from the man who sent out the letter. So we are independent, and we want to listen to our constituency, which is you, and represent ourselves and you in keeping an eye on this process. My first slide here, I'll go through these things quickly because I'd like to leave more time at the end to read a letter from a former board member who's now a member of the public, as well as take as many more questions as people have. We've heard a lot about in the previous presentations about metering. And to reiterate what Sierra said before, The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act does not authorize the metering of us de minimis residential well users, but makes it likely for other private wells doing commercial, industrial, or agricultural use with the water. But you know, it always, from my cynical take of these things, I wonder, okay, at what point down the road will someone bring up some sort of burden of proof for us to be regarded as de minimis? You know, none of that's been discussed, but these are things that we want to stay vigilant about and listen to the nuance and all the descriptions of these things as this plan is put together to be conscious of. And we hope you'll follow along with us. Taxes and fees. So just like Jeff was saying, and you know, the news that we got from John and Sierra before, you know, there are no management taxes or fees on us de minimis users planned. And you know, Jeff emphasized that we're in a pretty good state right now from the minimal amount of information. Well, it's a lot to us, but the minimal amount of information and progress on this thing 3 years in, it doesn't appear that we're going to require any of these large, expensive projects like some of these Central Valley basins will have to figure out how to do. So there's not a lot of pressure, but all it takes is a bleed of money and you know, tangents and spending that will lead us to a point where we run out of money to be the entree to justifying some sort of taxes and fees. And so I think, you know, I can't speak for Jeff and Angela, but I think a goal to me as private well owner representatives is that we would more wholeheartedly support a final management plan that contains clear prohibition of any future taxes and fees on us. With that said, I think there's, you know, John talked about it some, but there's a lot more work to be done and discovery to be had to figure out what private well owners contribute. In one previous meeting, I had an idea that, you know, based on if we knew where all of our wells were and we knew the topography of our land and what type of soil was under it, what the percolation rate was, all those things, we could figure out very roughly what our use and our recharge was and whether or not each of us was a net positive. Fiscal oversight. I mean, there's not too much to say about this, but there are just a litany of numbers flying around, and you know, we have regular look at budgets at the board meetings, and you know, that's something we keep an eye on. It's sort of hard to learn all the science and at the same time scrutinize the numbers, but it's important that we do that to stave off potential taxes and fees. You know, there was a little talk earlier, I don't know if it was the same study, but, you know, there's a sensitivity analysis study that's been proposed. I don't know if it's been done yet, that would gauge the effect of eliminating private wells. I still am not entirely certain, other than theoretically, why we would spend scarce money on studying such a thing. But those are types of things that we focus on in our fiscal oversight. The other thing that's come up more recently, well, not recently, it's been forming over the last 7 or 8 months, is barriers to participation for us as private well owners. You know, you can see from John Rickard tonight, who's a private well owner, and it's, you know, I've struggled with this for many, many years now. We enjoy living in the outback a little bit. We are, you know, we're not proximate to city water and other city benefits. And so we have sketchy mountain internet connections, and we have all sorts of issues which can stand in the way of our participation of the process normally, let alone when it turns into Zooming. And no one who calls in on a telephone is going to and can't see the visual materials is going to be able to follow along for these regular 3.5-hour board meetings that we have once a month. So, in the past, the last time we did one of these outreach meetings to private well owners to give them an update and keep them involved in the process and let them know we were their representatives, we filled up a large room at the water district, no problem. It was standing room only in the back. Well, we can't do that anymore. And if we're able to do that, it helps the other board members who aren't private well owners to think more carefully about proposing projects or whatever that will be funded by charging us for the water that sits underneath us as private well owners. Next slide. And as a direct example of this, we've heard for months now about people that are essential, and private well owners, according to Sigma, are essential to this process. Yet there's no exception like there is in work these days for us to be essential participants, and we have to get with the program in Zoom or forget about it. So when I first started, I was the alternate like Jeff is now, and Angela and Nick Brolick were the two seated board members. Nick had to leave service at some point, and now he's a private citizen, but still has very strong views that I wholeheartedly echo. And he wrote in a letter that he would like read tonight. And so I'm going to go ahead and read this letter. You guys can all read it. It'll be posted on the website tomorrow. But he makes very succinct points that only Nick can make in this way. Dear board members, my name is Nick Brolick, and for over 40 years now, I've lived on acreage west of Scotts Valley and paid to have my well drilled. I've paid for and installed my own septic system. I have paid to have electrical poles installed by PG&E, and I paid to have the propane pad and tanks installed. First, the ground rules about which I'm writing this letter. I'm talking specifically about only those domestic wells that provide up to 2 acre-feet per year of water for domestic use only. This use is for 4 households or less on one well, also known as de minimis wells. The reason for this is that the county and state have rules that apply to 5 or more households on one well, mutual water systems, and those that are using more than 2 acre-feet per year or are running a commercial or agricultural endeavor. My main objective is that I want to go on record as opposing any fee, tax, or charge of any kind that this board or any future board or government entity, hold on here, there we go, may be contemplating charging today or in the future to private landowners like myself for the water that we pump from our wells. Here are the reasons why we should not be charged a fee to pump our own water. 1, we pay to drill our well. 2, we pay for our pumps and infrastructure and storage tanks. 3, we pay the electric bill to run our pumps. 4, we pay to maintain our water system. 5, we pay to have the water quality checked. 6, we pay for our sewage septic system. 7, we pay to maintain our sewage septic system. Take the following example and let's analyze further why we should not be charged any fees. Most private well owners live on 1 acre or more. If 1 inch of rain falls on their 1 acre, it will collect about 27,154 gallons per year. At 20 inches of rain, very low for our area, 1 acre collects about 543,000 gallons per year. A household of 4 uses about 500 gallons per day, or 182,500 gallons per year. A large portion of this usage goes back into the ground through the septic system. That means that the homeowner's 1 acre parcel produces over 360,500 net gallons to the aquifer per year. Based on this example, the private well owner is a net supplier of water and not a user at all. Most own much larger parcels and thus produce even more water to recharge the aquifer. The reason that this is so important is that the government is planning at some point in time to charge private well owners a tax fee for managing the groundwater basin. These private well owners already manage their portion of the groundwater basin more efficiently than any government agency could. The private well owners do this management at their own expense and at no cost to the government agency. There is no justification for any government agency to levy a tax fee on private well owners. Please make sure that each board member has a copy of this letter and that it is made available to the general public. Thank you for taking the time to read my letter. Nick Froelich, Scotts Valley, and Nick lives not too far from myself and Jeff. Anyway, you know, Nick's not able to participate in this, and he would very much like to be able to do so, but we want to make sure that even if you're not able to participate, you can get access to these things or get access to each of us. Up on the website will be posted, as always, all the updated meeting materials, the slides from tonight, our names and email addresses so that you can reach out to any or all of us as your representatives, and stay informed and stay vigilant with us. You can attend meetings and be vocal. That said, it may be hard to do, but if you find it hard to do, let us be vocal for you. You can email us. You can read a quarterly email that we're going to start sending out to get this a little bit more grassroots so that we can make contact with each and all of you that want to be contacted. You can volunteer for the well sounding program. There's an email address on the screen and it'll be on the website. My understanding is it's free, but sometimes there are limitations. You have to have the right type of wellhead that allows them to connect to it. But it's would be very useful material. In fact, I got a text from one of my neighbors sharing our well tonight during the meeting that they'd be interested in participating in this, and we'll have further discussion about it. The next meeting of the general board is going to be held this coming week on December 9th at 5:30. Please tune in if you have the patience. You can shut off your video and sit and eat dinner and listen to it, and it'll probably get you thoroughly prepared to go to sleep at a nice early time. There's our website up there. You can sign up for our email list if you're not already on there. And now I think it's time for some Q&A.
All right, thank you. So I'm monitoring the chat, and in the interim, while we give people an opportunity to type, first of all, let me thank everybody for coming. It is 8 o'clock. I think some of us are going to be willing to stick around a little bit longer to answer questions. So if you have to go, that's great. You can always contact us later. I also want to let everybody know that the private well owner representative email addresses are on the website, the link that they showed. So, you know, it's not a bad idea to get in touch with them just so that they have your email address in case there's ever anything that they want to get in touch with you about in the future. You know, if we hold more of these meetings or as the draft plan is available. And also we have the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency has an email listserv. If you have not already signed up for it, that will tell you about the regular, we have emails that go out before every board meeting with the agenda. So if anybody has any additional questions, please go ahead and type them in the chat. Giving a moment. Maybe we got to all of them.
There is one from Ann Green.
Oh gosh, did I miss it? Let me. Oh, thank you. So Ann asks if other Santa Cruz County basins are suffering from seawater intrusion, will they need to pull from areas like the Santa Margarita Basin? So I can start to answer that one, and I'd ask that John or Georgina, if you feel like I've missed something, please get involved. So every basin is required to meet sustainability, and they have to figure out a way to do that. There's no prohibition on an agency buying water from somewhere else if they're able to sell it. However, that can't come at the cost of another area being able to reach sustainability. So in our case, nobody could come and take water from the Santa Margarita Basin. That is something that we were, it wouldn't be allowed. We also have to have agreements with our neighboring basin. In this case, that's the Santa Cruz Mid-County Groundwater Basin. that ensures that nobody's actions to meet sustainability will be negatively impacting their basins. There is some hydrologic connection between the two, so we have to make sure that nothing that we do could negatively impact their basin and vice versa. So in short, the answer to that question is no, the neighboring basins have to find ways, if there isn't excess water to be supplied to them from around here, then they would have to find their own ways to create more water themselves. All right. And thank you, Jeff, for pointing that out. So people, again, if you're curious about whether your property falls within this groundwater basin or potentially one of the neighboring basins that's also subject to the Groundwater Management Act, you can email me your address and I can look it up on the county's GIS very easily. So
I think there's a website they can go to that has that. You type in your address and it tells you.
You know, I checked that the other day and it wasn't working, but I will double check. And if possible, we can get that. You can do it through the county's GIS. It's not entirely intuitive, but anybody has access to that. So we can try to put a link to that on our website, and certainly you can send me an email with your address and I can get back to you pretty quickly. Are there any other questions? Gosh. I did see that there had been somebody on the phone. Nick, are you able to unmute in case they had questions, or they might not even still be here?
Yeah, I'm looking through right now. It looks like there are a couple folks coming in via iPad, and there is one person who is likewise tethered. However, I'm under the impression that they should still be able to type out chat requests.
Okay, well, it might be that we did such a thorough job. I'm going to take that to mean that we did such a thorough job that we did not leave anybody with any uncertainty. I'm just checking now to see.
Your other questions you skipped over, I think.
That's possible.
One question was, how did the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency get started?
I did miss that one. Okay. You want to answer that one, John?
I can take a crack at it. I don't have my notes in front of me, so I don't know the exact dates. But there was an agency, there was a group before the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency was formed. There was a Santa Margarita Groundwater Management Committee that consisted of a lot of the same representatives that eventually were on the agency. And that group probably formed, I'm guessing right now offhand, in the early 2000s to get together and discuss how to coordinate management of the basin. And then when the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act passed in 2014, that provided a mechanism to really formalize that whole thing, that whole process. And that's when the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency was formed. I believe probably in 2015 or 16 was when the agency was formed.
That's it. So I see another one that I missed here. What is the regulatory worst case scenario for any groundwater user group, including private well owners? And is there a compensation strategy for groundwater group or individual that voluntarily reduces or stops their use? I would say, and others can jump in, that the worst case scenario from a regulatory standpoint would be the groundwater agency failing to meet one of the requirements and the state coming in and intervening and putting some sort of cap on pumping and charging people. I think that is the worst case scenario that this basin could face. I think locally, I don't have much to speculate on what the worst case scenario would be other than cost related concerns. In terms of compensation strategy for groundwater group or individual that reduces or stops their use, that is something that we haven't talked about in great detail at an agency level. That's something that is offered. There are rebates available from the water districts for their own customers, but we don't have anything available right now for private well owners. The state was offering some rebates for a while. They're not available right now, but that's something that we always pay attention to and can share if something arises. So Brett has let us know that the Santa Margarita Advisory Committee was formed in 1994 and Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency was formed in 2017.
Oh, good for them. Well, I wasn't too far off.
Somebody else had previously asked a question regarding what fees, asking for a ballpark figure of what fees could be, and that would be just purely speculation on this at this time. I can say that in Pajaro, private well owners are charged $115 per year, but I cannot, and I don't think anyone else here would like to, although you can jump in if I'm speaking inaccurately, but I don't know that anybody else would want to speculate.
So Sierra, I just want to make a comment. You can, elaborate a little bit just so people know, but Mid-County, which is a county that is in a worse off situation than we are, and they're further along in this process, there's no talk of charging private well owners in that area at this time, correct? Correct. So our neighboring basin is the Santa Cruz Mid-County Groundwater Basin. Because of the seawater intrusion risk, they were on an accelerated timeline. Their groundwater sustainability plan was submitted in January, and it does not include, it doesn't include charging any fees at the moment for any private well owners. It does include a metering program for large non-de minimis users that aren't already metered through the small water system metering ordinances, and that work is going to be starting, but there's no talk of fees at this time, although they did not eliminate it as a possibility in the plan. Okay. All right. I'm not seeing any other questions, and it is now past 8 o'clock, so I think it is time to adjourn our meeting. I want to thank everybody for coming, especially those of you who spend your Wednesday evening sitting in front of a computer. We very much appreciate you taking the time. Please tell your friends and your neighbors about this. If they weren't able to join, let them know that they can find the information on our website. We just got one question through Facebook. Are there any special considerations for private wells near a creek just under the wire? John, do you want to respond to that one?
Sure. The concern there for wells near creeks is that they may be directly drawing water from the creek if they're located very close to the creek. Right now, the county does not have any specific regulations there, but there have been some recent court cases that may require us to look more closely at that issue with new wells going in near creeks, and to require that those wells be constructed in a way with a deep enough seal so they really weren't drawing water from the creek. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the State Water Resources Control Board has also gotten more concerned about this issue. And for instance, if somebody is trying to get a cannabis permit, they look very closely at where the well is and what influence a well may have on the creek. It's sort of it's a work in progress, I think, at this point.
All right, thank you. So I think that was our last question, and it's appropriate that John got to answer it at his last stakeholder meeting.
Oh, God. I can come back as the audience next time.
We expect you to.
I can be a cranky private well owner.
Are you inside the boundary?
No, I'm in the Mid-County Basin, so I can, but I have a lot of interest and concern and, a lot of history with the Santa Margarita Basin. So it's something that I will probably still be haunting you guys a little bit one way or another.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for attending. I hope you have a great rest of your week. And I look forward to seeing many of your faces at upcoming Groundwater Agency board meetings.